Buckland, for accepting to give us this short interview. Could you please present yourself?
Yes, my name is Robert Buckland MP. I'm the Conservative Member of Parliament for South Swindon and Chair of the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission.
Thank you. I understand you just had a meeting with a group of some representatives from Central Africa. Could you talk to us about the meeting you just had?
Yes, we had a meeting from various representatives from the Democratic Republic of Congo, particular representatives from organisations that wish to promote human rights and freedom within that huge country, and also some other people, most notably a gentleman from Uganda and a lady from Nigeria, who were here to emphasise the common threads that often run through the politics, not just of Central Africa, but indeed of the whole of the continent. And I found that a very useful dimension to what was a wide-ranging discussion.
Thank you. Why did you decide to have a meeting at this particular moment? What is happening in Central Africa to have that meeting?
Well, we know that currently elections have just been held in DRC, and they are the subject of huge concern. From the evidence that I have read from organisations such as the Jimmy Carter Centre, it is clear to me that in at least parts of DRC, the election results are not credible. And they do not seem to be proper ways in which the results can be verified by independent observers. Now, this is highly regrettable, to say the least. The government pledged that it would go into this process and would ensure free and fair elections. I don't believe that that is happening, and that is a tragedy for the people of DRC. It's a badge of shame for the government, and it could precipitate even more chaos and bloodshed in an already troubled nation.
This situation seems to be repeating itself all over Africa. We had elections recently in Uganda. We're having the opposition party there refusing to accept the result of the elections, and that happened, I think, again in Rwanda. What seems to be happening? Why is it that although elections are taking place, people do not believe they are being fair?
I think that they see that other factors are often at play here. Governments seem to pay lip service to freedom and the rule of law, and sometimes set up structures that are supposed to guarantee that, but the reality is something different, and I'm afraid that at the heart of it are economic reasons. And I see big vested interests, I see natural resources that other countries and indeed companies want to exploit, and I'm afraid I see that old phenomenon of corruption which seems to be endemic in far too many states, not just in Africa but in other parts of the world as well.
Thank you. Africa seems to be facing the same problem all over. You can see that you have a multitude of issues there. Poverty is one of the key issues. We're having a lack of infrastructure. We're having political instability which are leading to wars in that part of the continent. What do you think the West could do to change the situation, not only in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but in Central Africa as a whole?
I think the DRC being so big is key to some of the surrounding countries in the region, because we know that there is interference and there is incursion from other countries, particularly in the east of DRC. My view is that it's the duty of Western governments to put as much pressure as possible on questionable regimes by targeting sanctions and measures which will undermine the ability of that regime to carry on benefiting from unlawful or corrupt practices. So targeting the movement of members of the regime, targeting their assets, freezing them abroad if necessary, and taking really concerted action to put pressure on these countries and these regimes to explain to them that unless they listen to their people, then they do not deserve to carry on in office.
Thank you. Now, this seems to be happening all over the place. We had the same situation in Zimbabwe, for instance. Sanctions seem not to be working there. Don't you think that people in power in Africa might need a way out for them to be able to leave power without the fear of ending up, for instance, in the ICC?
Well, you have to start from first principles, and you should want to seek the justice. And the ICC is, I think, a suitable venue for a lot of these issues to be properly tried. But one has to also think of the welfare of the people. And if there is no exit strategy, bloodshed will continue and lives will be lost and people will remain in a state of fear and oppression, then there are, I think, grounds for negotiation and for discussion. And indeed it's worked to some extent in a number of other African countries. I don't think anybody can pretend that the situation in Zimbabwe is perfect, but the compromise that was reached there after the last election did at least spare further bloodshed and unrest in that troubled country. And the same can be said about Kenya, when Arap Moi came to the end of his long period in power with a power-sharing arrangement after the elections there. So I am not somebody who would discount that approach, and if it can be done in Congo, then it should be done so that we can avoid further bloodshed and indeed the horrific use of rape as a weapon and the oppression of women and children and indeed men by the mercenaries that we know have poured into the country, who are armed to the teeth and who could cause real mayhem if they were allowed to let rip.
If we talk about the policy of the duty to protect, which is a new philosophy with the United Nations, if you look at what's happening in Libya, where do you draw the line when, for instance, instead of removing a dictator, you end up killing more people than the dictator would have done over maybe 10 years?
Well, you can never predict what the outcome is going to be finally, but if there isn't a proper exit strategy, an outcome, then it is dangerous, I think, for Western countries to intervene in the affairs of other parts of the world. The strength about the Libyan operation was that it had the support of the Arab League. Without the support of Arab countries, I do not believe that the West should have got involved. But they did support it, they took part in the operation, and we secured the agreement of most of the major countries in the world. China and Russia abstained, but it did allow a coalition to be built up via the UN to implement a resolution that indeed does seem to reflect this concept of a duty to protect.
Now, if you look, for instance, to what is happening in Sudan, we had a president who is still in power, Bashir, being inducted as a war criminal in the ICC. Do you think that will benefit the country or Africa as a whole when people in power are fearing of leaving power because they'll end up in The Hague? Or the West is still not considering the interests of Africans?
Well, international law is still developing. It's still very much a matter of political will, I think. But we do have a structure in The Hague that has worked and has brought people to justice. And I think that any reasonable person would want to see calm, clear and careful justice being meted out to these people rather than the same methods of barbarism that they have used themselves. It sends a message, I think, to countries across the world that there is a better way of dealing with this problem. But I do accept that that can mean that dictators have nowhere to hide or turn to as an exit strategy. It's a real tussle as to which is the right approach to take. I think you need to look at each case carefully on its own merits. I would finally say that what happened to Gaddafi was not my preferred way of dealing with things. I wish that he had been kept alive and brought to justice in The Hague, because his end was as brutal and as barbaric as the methods that he used against his own people. And if we are to try and set new standards in world affairs, we have to do better than that.
Can you possibly summarise the request made to you by the group which you made today?
Yes, the group have asked me to write in my capacity as Chair of the Human Rights Commission to the Foreign Secretary to outline some of the proposals that they would like to see. First of all, that the British government declare that they are not satisfied with the election result. And secondly, to urge the British government to consider further measures to be taken against the assets of the regime and indeed the movement of people who are connected with the regime. And thirdly, to seek mediation and legitimate means by which further bloodshed in the country can be avoided. So a number of key messages that I have promised will be taken back to the British government.
Thank you very much.